point onwards, we'll know whether
the next generation, your children and grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.
A recent report estimates that armed conflicts cost Africa a whopping $18 billion annually, with 60 to 90% of deaths caused by small and light weapons. Now, West Africa alone accounts for 8 million of the 100 million small arms in circulation in the continent. The West African sub-region sits on a ticking time bomb. 40% of these arms are in the hands of civilians. The direct consequence has been a spike in violent activities across the Niger and through the Sahel. And of course, at the other end of this open-ended barrel lies destruction, untold poverty, hardship, and underdevelopment. Now closing in on its third decade, the Economic Community of West African States push for a single currency by the year 2020 is under threat from security, socio-economic, and political challenges. I am Alva Obo. This Global Perspective. Even though ECOWAS indeed began with economic interest, it was glaring politics would eventually have the final say. The common goal was to bring about the free movement of goods and services throughout the sub-region. But then the rift between the Lusophone, the Francophone, and the Anglophone prevailed in the formative years of ECOWAS through the 1980s.
Also, West African Economic Community was proposed. That was what we first proposed. But the French-speaking countries wanted that one to be declared as West African Economic Community.
When the friction evened out in the late 1980s, economic progress was slow and uncoordinated. West Africa was a haven for military takeovers and political instability until the 1990s, when the jackboots and berets gave way to civilian rule. A decade-long bloody war in Liberia and Sierra Leone helped fuse member states together. For the first time, an economic body was pursuing a war in a neighboring state without a mandate from the United Nations. The cost of the Liberian and Sierra Leone wars took a toll on the socio-economic fabric of both countries and also the purse of the sub-regional body. Nigeria is a major financier of ECOWAS, paying the annual bills of several of its member states. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo once reported that Nigeria spent a whopping $12 billion in ending both wars. In the aftermath, he said Nigeria will reduce its peacekeeping efforts even though there are at least 2,000 Nigerian soldiers remaining in Liberia. Nearly a decade after the wars have ended in Liberia and Sierra Leone, the brains trust of Nigeria's foreign policy experts analyze the past, the present, and the future.
And the long-term benefits and short-term losses of the integration process. How do we handle unequal distribution of integration benefits?
Even with ECOWAS economic integration model stunted, with no single currency or free movement of goods and services, there is the existence of the ECOWAS court. Its role in promoting the rule of law is hotly debatable.
So what we therefore did then was to look at the protocol, meet with the management of the court and the leadership of the ECOWAS. That you can't have a court that is redundant, and there's so much injustice in the region, and particularly for some of those countries, like the Gambia, where you have His Excellency like the Professor Yaya Jammeh, really shot all over the people, and he didn't recognize, or he doesn't recognize the courts.
President Yaya Jammeh is controversial to say the least, with a rigid control over the country's media.
Somebody said that
This country is a hell for journalists. Well, there are freedoms and there are responsibilities. The journalists are less than 1% of the population. And if anybody expects me to allow less than 1% of the population to destroy 99% of the population, you are in the wrong place.
Very little has changed from his days as a jackboot dictator. Same for Burkina Faso's Blaise Compaoré, who constantly quells and crushes protests since his transformation also from military to civilian rule.
Even the very act of establishing ECOWAS itself was a political action. So politics begat ECOWAS, and politics sustained ECOWAS. The politics of financing, the politics of headquarter location, the politics of interaction among states, the politics of accommodation, compromises, which is usual in such supranational organizations. But beyond that, I think what ECOWAS has done, and which no other international organizations had done before that, is the fact that ECOWAS is the first economic organization to have gone military in terms of dealing with security issues as took place in Liberia and Sierra Leone. There's no economic organization before that had done so. Of course you have NATO. NATO is not an economic organization. And so ECOWAS had taken political decisions to deal with the security of West African states at a point when most people thought, oh my God, let these bloody Africans kill themselves.
Apparent disconnect in the politics and the day-to-day business of running governance, where you look at the people and the leadership. And this is typified in the way the people on the streets do not reckon with the fact that they are part of the economic grouping called ECOWAS. How does the man on the street say, I am a citizen of ECOWAS?
Well, in a lot of ways, part of it is because you must accept that there are problems. ECOWAS has always been a state-centric organization, a supranational organization that integrates states. And like somebody said earlier at this conference, it is now moving towards being people-centric, integrating people instead of states. So to go to the level of people, you need advocacy, you need enlightenment. Yes, the market woman at Ibadan is seen in Côte d'Ivoire. From Kano, you see them in Senegal, and so on. Yes, some of this preceded this century, even last century, in terms of movement. It preceded ECOWAS. But since there is ECOWAS, and since there is a political superstructure and a new formal economic substructure, it is important that you not only integrate the formal structures, but enlighten the people to build a sense of community and make them feel that these are the privileges they have.
In the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, France was a dominant factor in many francophone countries, and we do know the part they played in the spat between the Anglophone and the Francophone and the Lusophone countries. What would you say to people who say that we are at the second stage of neocolonization in Africa and also in West Africa?
The issue is more economic and functional, in the sense that I can see France continuing for a little while longer to deal with funding many francophone states and all that. I can see Britain supporting some of the weaker, smaller African states. But believe you me, even in France and in Britain, there is donor fatigue, and the burden of empire is telling on them. It's already telling on them. If you realize that the bushfire riot in inner cities of France was a result of its colonial policies, which brought people in through assimilation policies, but never integrated them, never really assimilated them. They were in the fringes of the society. That was part of the burden of empire.
It made a lot of gains from the past. In the past, the berets and the jackboots held sway in government house. Now we have democracy in many West African countries. Is there something we're not doing right, knowing the fact that a lot of these democratic governments in place do have a lot of work to do, where we have rights of human rights abuses and political intolerance going on every day?
Two things. I'm not part of this excessive euphoria about the transfer of Western democratic institutions into West Africa or Africa. This is the second time it's happening. The wave, the third time it's happening. The wave of democracy in the 60s, then late 80s, then now we have the same wave. Let me make the point that you cannot transfer democratic and political institutions from the West to Africa and let them grow in Africa without adapting them to our circumstances. And I have always argued that Western democratic institutions must be domesticated in our own setting. There are aspects of our setting which must actually underpin those institutions. Let me give you an example. Most African societies traditionally do not, even where you have kings, do not take decisions like that. They take decisions by consensus. There is no institutionalized opposition there. And you are in the establishment. You are all part of the decision-making body, and consensually you take your decisions. Once you have institutionalized opposition, which is un-African and Western, many politicians now feel that institutionalized opposition is the establishment of enemies, the enemy camp, as it were. So it's a battleground between enemies and friends.
Now, let's zero in on one of West Africa's troubled spots. That's Mali. ECOWAS has scored a major diplomatic win when it forced a group of ambitious officers to hand over power back to the civilians. But then Mali is far more divided than it ever was. Strong rhetoric of force from the government and ECOWAS has been met with equal defiance. The stakes are high for all parties involved, and the consequence of any action is certain to re-echo across the Sahel and then the rest of Africa. So, what will it be? Deal or no deal for the Republic of Azawad? The easy part was definitely the handover after the removal of sanctions by the African Union and ECOWAS. Mali's interim president faces the uphill task of organizing new elections in the mostly desert state in 40 days. But that task pales in comparison to his number one challenge, which is reunifying the south of the country with the north.
Bien entendu, vous avez vécu ces choses-là en direct. Vous savez comme moi que ça ne peut pas se faire comme par un coup de baguette magique, mais ça va se faire. Ça va se faire essentiellement pour permettre à l'ensemble du peuple malien de se remobiliser, de se réarmer pour recouvrer les territoires qui sont occupés au nord, de se réarmer pour relancer sa démocratie.
The former labor activist who was jailed for opposing Mali's dictatorship in the 1980s but went on to hold a number of cabinet posts after the launch of multi-party politics in the country in the 1990s will need all the tact of a veteran negotiator to succeed.
C'est extrêmement délicat, mais un travail vital qui va décider de l'avenir de notre pays. Et c'est pour cela que je vous demande, après tous les efforts que vous avez consentis, après toutes les difficultés que vous avez traversées, de rester mobilisés. De rester mobilisés. De ne pas croire que c'est terminé. Ça n'est pas terminé. Vous et nous, avec l'armée malienne, qui sera au premier rang, parce qu'il s'agit de recouvrir les territoires. Et le cas est...
In the north of the country, there have been reports of looting and human rights abuses, including rapes and killings since the rebel seizures of key towns, including the ancient trading post of Timbuktu and the garrison town of Gao. But the government of the new state is already sitting neck deep in its new conquest.
Alhamdulillah, babore kan shi dabu, wai dabu. Alhamdulillah, dingara wai gato, ikoi tala gangari. Ama wo kumno dumo ikoi tala nirgangari ama akongangisi.
Optimism is an idyllic state, for it is a lonely world that the Republic of Azawad faces with no official recognition from the rest of the world. But Mali's neighbors and security experts fear Azawad has all the trappings of a new rogue state, providing a haven for local Al-Qaeda allies and Islamists who are currently seeking to impose Sharia law on the parts of northern territory they control.
Now, if ECOWAS uses force this time, there's going to be massive bloodshed because the Tuaregs, they are heavily armed. It is true that Mali has a strategic partnership with the US. In fact, Mali is the regional partner in the US, of the US, in what is called Trans-Saharan Counter-Terrorism Initiative Partnership. Mali is a partner of the US in that. And in that partnership, the US provides military hardware, provides training for Mali's military so that Mali can take charge of its security. So, if you want to use force against the Tuaregs, you have ECOWAS and possibly, the US support, bringing war into the territory. Is there a guarantee that ECOWAS will win? There's no guarantee, because even though the state of Azawad that was declared on the 6th of April has not yet been recognized by any country, we cannot, when it comes to use of force, we do not know that Arab countries are not in support of Azawad. We do not have that guarantee.
What would you say is the most likable option to you, for example, in dealing with this situation? Force out of the way because of the calamitous consequences that could arise. What would you say are the options available to ECOWAS and the mediators in this?
In fact, I think that what is happening in Mali right now presents a beautiful opportunity for Africa to begin to evolve a system, a peaceful system, whereby people who who have never recognized the colonial borders and have always agitated of wanting to come out, that there should be a peaceful transition to autonomy. In Mali, in the case of Mali, I would say that because the state of Mali has stayed on now for 50 years, and the Tuaregs have been part of the state of Mali, my first thought would be that perhaps it is time to think about a confederacy or a federal option, giving the regions more and more autonomy. Because what is the quarrel of the Tuaregs with the state of Mali? They wanted more autonomy in the north. 2, they wanted the government to pay more attention to the north. They wanted autonomy, but at the same time, they also wanted to enjoy the benefit of the Malian state. Because mark you, Mali is divided into 8 regions. 3 of this region is what the Tuaregs are claiming as being Tuareg region, starting from a place called Tudeni, Kidal, Gao. And they throw in Timbuktu, just for psychological reasons, because Timbuktu is the ancient town that houses the very first university in the world. It has, a lot of historic benefits, so they throw that in. But what they want is the 3 Tuareg provinces to be more and more autonomous.
Some people will argue, and they'll say, look at this. This could set up a chain reaction. You have a number of disgruntled groups, Sahel region, all across Africa, and they allow them get this sort of sovereignty, get their own state, their own country. How do we deal with this not becoming a chain reaction all around the continent?
Yeah. In fact, it would be a chain reaction. That's why I say what we should do is evaluate the situation. Azawad region has always been a part of Mali in the last 50 years, right? Even though the Tuaregs always, question why they should be in Mali. Okay, because really, if you say that every group that is disgruntled with the colonial borders should go their separate ways, of course, Africa will be in splinters. So that's not what we should be opting for now. What we should be opting for is, how do we repair the colonial boundary damage, so to speak? Why doesn't Mali explore federalism? Right? I mean, in fact, perhaps federalism should be what should be explored. If that fails, then maybe confederate states. But federalism, in the sense that the regions should be able to dictate more what is happening about them.
Yeah, it's about time. On my way out. Oh, well, is it French President Nicolas Sarkozy's time on his way out? He faced an uphill task as he battled through months of negative poll ratings in his second term bid as the president of his country. Mission improbable has now become mission impossible. When you realize he has become the first sitting president of France to lose a first round to the opposition, and it could get worse on the 6th of May. Outside France, President Sarkozy has an emperor-like aura after he led the onslaught on Muammar Gaddafi's forces and then sent Cote d'Ivoire's defiant leader Laurent Gbagbo to The Hague on charges of war crime. This Sarkozy was supposed to enjoy the benefits of a disgraced opposition led by Strauss-Kahn, who was forced to withdraw from the presidential race. Instead, he plays catch-up, where the odds are now stacked high against him. So what is it going to be for President Bling Bling? Let's just say President Hyper. Je sais bien. Oh, let's say that's how the cookies crumble in France. That's all for Global Perspectives today. I am Aogo Obo. Thank you for watching.
forces. This is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether
the next generation, your children and grandchildren, will do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.